Evening, day walkers and night stalkers. It's me, your twisted southern horror queen, coming to you live from under a full moon right here in southeastern Louisiana. If you're hearing my voice tonight on iTunes, iHeart, Spreaker, TuneIn, Arm Radio, or The Garden, or a plethora of other live streams, that's thanks to Big Joe Savino. He's the owner of Arm Radio Digital on TuneIn Satellite. Joe's got a set that clanks, because who else would put a hot mic in front of this demented little mind and then broadcast it over 62 different countries on countless other networks? Only Joe, right? By the way, check out Joe Rock's show on Thursday nights, right after my always awesome and sometimes sober producer, Jimmy Bell, does his show Pot Talk with his sadistic little sidekick, Paul Daniels. And as always, on Wednesday nights, there's, of course, Big Johnny Blenders, Whiskey Cars and Cigars. He comes on right before my boy Glenn Spillman does his show, Sports Insider. We got a little bit of everything right here on Armed Radio. So check us out on armedradio.com, and you can check out the shows and see what all's going on and see if maybe there's something else you might be missing on a different night of the week. Because I know you're here on Mondays for the Twisted Southern Horror Queen show, right? All right, before we kick off all the madness, I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsors for the Adrian's Fury Dragster. That's Surreal Studios, D&M Graphics, Renegade Racing Fuel, Amalay Oil, and of course, my favorite, Naked Wines. That is awesome right there. I wish I could pass that out to you guys, but can't do it. All right, so before we go on, I do want to say a big thank you guys for all the feedback last week after the show. Seems like y'all all digging the Warren case files. I know, right? There's some crazy shit going on right there. And you guys all voted to hear more, so you're going to get that right here tonight. But before I give you the scary, I do have to tell you next week on Monday is Christmas, so I'm not going to be here with you guys. Y'all have other things to do. There's a whole lot of presents to open and family to slap around and liquor to drink and food to eat. So you guys enjoy all that, because you know I'm going to be doing that. And speaking of Christmas, tonight's show only, $100 wine gift cards. Who wants one? I'm feeling a little bit on the generous side. You guys better take advantage of it, because that don't happen very often. If you want one, message me. Don't comment underneath the video, because I probably won't see it later. Message me on my Southern Horror Queen page or on my personal page if you're on there. Drop me a line, let me know, give me a mailing address, and I'll shoot one out to you, but only if you've been a bad little girl or boy this year. No good, creepy kids. All right, before I get rolling with everything, got to give some more shouts out, because I see MJ's joining me tonight, and my boy Glenn Spillman. How's everything hanging over there on the West Coast, young man? Susie Jones, oh, my girl, I've been digging into Coon Hill Cemetery. It will be on the next show, but I don't know if that's going to be on New Year's Day, because that's the 1st, which is a Monday, or if it's going to be on the following week, because we're not that organized here on Armed Radio. We'll figure it out and let you guys know. Mitchell Ulmer, my sweetheart. We went to school together. He knew me as a wilder and less restrained individual, and so did Joey Willoughby. And D.W. Heron's known me since I was a badass little imp running around, so there's no need for explaining anything to most of these guys that are tuning in tonight. I'm glad you guys are here. Hey, Wayne, good to see you too. Thanks for tuning in. We're wrapping up a 3-part episode of the Warren case files, their most famous cases. But there's actually a couple in here tonight that they ranked among their top cases out of thousands and thousands. And a couple of them I hadn't heard of, so I'm hoping you guys hadn't heard of, because we don't want to keep talking about the same ones that everybody knows about, right? That's not going to be a problem tonight. Hey, James, good to see you in the house. Stay tuned. We're talking the Warrens. Jason, hey, Lynn, it's J.E. Bolton. Missed you at CreepyCon in Knoxville. Please come next year. Tell him to get in touch with me. I'd love to talk to him about that. Knoxville is not that far away, and I'd love to make that trip. It would be awesome. Okay, so if you haven't done it already, dim the lights, lock the doors, and kick out the damn kids. Grab your tasty adult beverage, and get ready to get your scary on, because we're fixing to kick it off right now. But not before I say hey to Ricky. Good to see you tonight, Ricky. Okay, so this is one of the case files that I'm betting you guys hadn't heard of. I had never heard of it till I started reading into their cases. It's called the South End Werewolf. Stop rolling your eyes. I can hear it from here. Let me explain it to you. It's not exactly what you think, but it's pretty crazy. This madness went down in a little coastal town in Essex, England. Now, this dude named Bill Ramsey had been tormented and possessed by a demon that would manifest itself as a wolf. Makes a little bit more sense to you now. See, I'm crazy, but I ain't that crazy. All right, so Ramsey was just a normal little kid until he got around the age of 9. And then this one day he's outside in the backyard and something just kind of went haywire inside of him. He said he remembered playing outside and all of a sudden this frigid cold overtook him. And he said he was overwhelmed by the wretched stench of something that smelled like rotten meat. For those of us on the Twisted Southern Horror Queen show, we already know that's a sign that there's a demon stalking your ass right there. But this 9-year-old kid, he didn't know any better. He said that all of a sudden he just went into this mad rage and he pulls a fence post out of the ground with the fence still attached to it. 9-year-old kid, we're talking 50, 60-pound kid, pulls an entire fence out of the ground. Something's going on right there, right? Well, he had a few other little incidents here and there, mostly around his puberty years, pretty typical for demonic possession. But he did grow up and he got married and he had kids, and nothing else really crazy happened till around the 1960s. Isn't that when LSD came out? I'm not sure. Anyway, so he's married, but a few years later, all of a sudden, their nights become plagued by his nightmares, and he would have cold sweats, and he'd wake up to the sounds of a wild animal panting, which he eventually figures out they were coming from him. He started having these spells, and when he felt like he was fixing to be overcome by this rage or aggression, he would just kind of lock himself away and stay away from everybody else. But at one point, he actually attacked a friend of his in a car when they're on their way home from a pub. And it had happened before one evening when they were out with his friends, and police pulled him over. He got out of the car, and apparently, from what I read, he did a pretty good job whooping the police's ass. So I'm not sure that was a real good thing to do, but it was back in the 60s. So maybe he didn't get locked up for it. He probably just got his ass kicked back later on. But anyway, in the middle of all this craziness, he had several stints in the hospital, and he always had these same recurring symptoms. He would be furious, enraged, and he had inhuman strength, and his teeth were bared and clenched, and he was always growling, and his shoulders were hunched over, and his hands would actually curl up like claws. And a lot of people, including medical staff, witnessed him while he was in this state. And they swore that his physical structure of his face and his hands and his body actually changed. And he actually resembled a wolf, so they said. I see my boy Lawrence is in the house. Hey, Joe, good to see you. And Herb Freeler's joined as well. Marguerite Braden, how's all them chillins doing? I hope everything's going awesome. And Glenn Spillman said, Dr. Albert Hoffman first synthesized LSD on 16 November 1938. Of course, you would know that, Glenn. Hello, Jose. Good to see you joining us tonight. Professor Glenn is in the lab talking LSD this evening, so you guys make sure you stay tuned. Anyway, so the Warrens get called in on this because there's all kind of different reports that have been being made by officials, both of the law-abiding type and, of course, the medical staff. So in an interview with the Warrens about their experience with this guy, Ramsey, Ed Warren stated that Ramsey would ask to be locked up in a jail cell when he felt like this was fixing to start kicking his ass again. And he just wanted to make sure he wasn't going to hurt anybody else. So, of course, when they got wind of what was going on with this guy, they had to fly him out to their home in Connecticut, where Bishop Robert McKenna would perform a recorded and very well-documented exorcism. Now, McKenna was kind of their right-hand guy, especially for cases right there in Connecticut and the surrounding area. I think I read in their files that he performed somewhere between 55 and 60 different ordained and recorded, documented exorcism for these guys. So 55 exorcisms, that's something to really consider right there. Anyway, the exorcism, of course, was successful, but it was not without incident. Ramsey did lose control of his faculties, I guess, just right after the rite began. And he wound up attacking McKenna several times throughout. He tried to bite him several times. Of course, he was clawing at him. He's acting like a wild animal because of the demon that was in him, not necessarily him. But it wasn't just McKenna and Ed Warren that got the beating. The poor guy was being shaken so violently. It was inhuman. The things that were documented. The guy is strapped to a chair, and the entire chair is shuddering and coming up and down off the ground and bouncing back and forth. So he was pretty beat up by the end of the whole situation as well. But he did escape with his soul. So, of course, there's that. Let's see who else has joined. Ronnie and Lori Owens. I'm doing great, Jose. I hope you're doing well, too. Josh TKO Turner is in the house. We miss you guys. You tell Wanda and Kaylee I said hello, and y'all have a Merry Christmas. It's about time to go do another con together. I'm missing you guys. And I want to see a picture of Kaylee's Christmas spider on the Christmas tree. So tell her to get on that. That's her homework assignment for sometime this week. I would just like to see that. All right. So the next case up from on the Warrens is actually Wade Cuevas. Watermelon moonshine. Aren't you guys coming up here sometime this week? It's only one state line. Come on, dude. We smuggled from Kentucky to Louisiana. You're crossing one little state line, and Mississippi and Louisiana don't care. You know, it's okay. Go ahead and hook us up. That'd be a nice little Christmas gift. All right. So could you imagine being Ed Warren and picking up the phone to find out that there is a general, I believe, calling from West Point Military Academy because they need to have a conversation. Yeah, so the U.S. Army actually did call the Warrens to investigate some crazy paranormal phenomena that was going on there at the base. It was October 1972 when the executive officer at the United States Military Academy called Ed Warren, which was a day before they were scheduled to come in and do a lecture for the cadets. Now, this dude's saying a whole lot of nothing, but Ed was smart enough to read in between the lines. And if you guys remember back to episode 1, Ed's got a military background, so he's able to understand what they're saying without them actually having said it. Thank God for that, right? So Ed, knowing that he wasn't going to elaborate any further over the phone, went ahead and scheduled to be there and go check things out. So the Warrens get there around 4 o'clock the next afternoon, and they were escorted to Major Donald Bowling's office. Now, Bowling, being hardcore military, sat there and dictated to them his schedule for the lecture, and then he began to explain that there had been some incidents on the base that he was describing as a breach in security, and not wanting to elaborate any further on that either. But all he'd say was that something was going on at the commanding general's house. They said that the MPs had scoured the place several times, but they couldn't come up with any explanation of what was going on there. So they had opened up other investigations, and of course it dwindled down to it was time to call the Warrens in because nobody understood what the hell was going on in this place. So there was this dinner that was planned for all the top brass this evening at the house before the lecture, and things had only been getting worse. But again, nobody's willing to enlighten the Warrens on what's happening there. Excuse me. So Bolin finally informs Ed that the commanding general wanted to speak with him before this dinner. So Ed finally decides he's going to prod a little bit, and he asks what the nature of the disturbances were. Bowling is a serious guy, but he's all of a sudden trying to fight off busting out in a laugh before he tells him the general's got a ghost in his house. So Boland takes the Warrens over to the general's place, and the general and his wife meet him in the foyer, and they take him into this nearby sitting room that's filled with antique furniture from the past 200 years of top brass that had occupied this mansion. Let me explain. This house was not just a little military on base house. This was a very large estate. It had been there for a couple hundred years, so God only knows what could have been attached to it. So the Warrens are sitting in the parlor with the general and his wife, and they're having polite conversation. Well, eventually the general starts kind of warming up, and he starts trying to tell the Warrens that as far as he knew, nothing macabre had ever happened in the house that he was aware of, but there had been growing numbers of incidents that were going down there, and nobody could explain what was going on to his satisfaction. So one of the minor recurring incidents he was, of course, glad to reveal to him. It was the first thing that he actually admitted to. He said that there was a private study that was down in the basement and had this bunk in it. And no matter how many times a day this bunk was made or what time of day it was when somebody went back down there to check on it, it always looked like somebody had been sleeping in it, and it was just tore up. The covers were everywhere, the pillows on the ground, that kind of stuff. So it looked like somebody had wild sex in it. But like I said, they would put it back together. Next time somebody went downstairs to check on it, the cot is all messed up again. So this joint had actually had ghostly rumors and reports for decades, but things recently had started to accelerate, and things were starting to disappear. But they would reappear later on the dresser in the master suite. The issue with this was, with him being a general, part of his position was to welcome, greet, and house and entertain foreign dignitaries, higher ranking brass, those kind of people that would come and visit and stay there for a weekend and watch the cadets graduate or whatever else is going on there. So it was these upper crust elite individuals that were having their wallets stolen, or their wives would be missing family jewels when they woke up in the morning. A rather expensive ring was taken from the wife of another general. So things had gotten bad. They're looking into it, and all they could do is like a week later call these people and say, okay, your ring is turned up. Let me ship this to you, or let me send this to you, or you can come get it. But still, that's leaving the general with egg on his face. And, can't blame him. That's a very bad position for him to be in, right? Chris Adams has joined us. Jessica Lynn Young's in the house. And Marie Moore's in the house. Connie Kiddock and Reese Williams. Merry Christmas to all you guys. We're wrapping up our 3-part episode on the Warrens' most famous cases. So stay tuned in and check it out. We're talking about the West Point case right now. So the conversation goes on between the general and the Warrens, and he's kind of finished explaining why he's so uncomfortable about this and why something has got to be done. And of course, we know why the Warrens are there, because they're going to do something about it. So after a few more minutes of question and answer between them, Lorraine suggested that maybe she should walk through the place and kind of get a feel for it, see if maybe she could pick up on something, get an idea of what's going on, why it's happening, or, things along those lines. So while she's walking around with the wife, the general takes Ed down into the basement, and of course, the bunk looks like somebody's been sleeping in it. So after that, they sit there and look around for a little while. Nothing transpires. They hear nothing. They see nothing. The general deliberately takes him back upstairs and through the kitchen, and he points at this wooden cutting board, and he can see that there's water. It's wet in the middle of it. And the general goes on to explain to Ed, no matter what happens, no matter how many days it sits there without being used, how many times it's dried off, the board is always wet. Now, we never did figure out exactly why that is. I'm sure there's something that's attached to it that doesn't think it's clean enough. I don't know what the case is, but that was just another one of the minor occurrences that the general had been made aware of there in his home. Now, Lorraine has walked around the lower level of the house, and she said that she really didn't pick up anything. Of course, she didn't go down into the basement. She's just walked through all the rooms on the bottom floor. But the one thing she was able to pick up on is she pinpointed exactly which room JFK had stayed in there when he came to visit a few years earlier. So, someone has joined my channel. So the general's wife then takes everybody upstairs on the second floor. And Lorraine said she immediately started picking up the impressions of some of the more powerful and prominent people that had lived in the house. Not necessarily their spirits, but just the impressions that they had left there. She went room by room, and in one room in particular, she was rather enthralled and stayed there for quite a while. She said that she sensed a very old and very wise woman that spent a lot of her time in that room. And she began explaining and describing to the general and his wife that she used to sit there next to the window and look out, and she was describing the things that this woman was seeing, and which, of course, so many years later, those things weren't there anymore. At least most of them weren't. She said that she couldn't put a finger on who the woman was, but she said that she was there to counsel a man that lived there. She wasn't his husband. So after she finishes describing everything, the general went ahead and spoke up and told Lorraine that the woman she was sensing was Douglas MacArthur's mother. And he also confirmed that they were standing in her room. So the group finished walking through the house, and they went ahead and met back up in the sitting room. Now, Lorraine informed the general that she hadn't sensed the spirit that had been responsible for all the mayhem that was going on there, but it was quite possible that the spirit had deliberately avoided them while they were doing their walk through the house. So at that point, she recommended to the general that she wanted to try to contact the spirit by means of going into a trance. Well, the general's a little bit hesitant at first, and the first thing that crosses his mind is a seance and a Ouija board. So Lorraine had to sit down and explain things to him and assure him that they would not be using a Ouija board. There would not be a seance. This was something that she did to communicate with the spirits that were there, of course, if they were willing to communicate. So the general agreed, but it was starting to get a little bit late. So the Warrens were invited to join the dinner party, and later they attended the conference. Well, after the conference, the general and his wife and the Warrens and a small private group of the top brass and their wives all go back to the general's house for a show, I guess. Well, Lorraine, feeling that she had made such a good connection to Mrs. MacArthur, decided that she would try to reach out to the spirit from Miss MacArthur's room. She goes into the room and everybody follows them in, and some people are standing around the doorway, some are standing around the walls, other people are sitting down on the floor. There's a good sized group of people trying to cram into this room to see what's fixing to happen. Lorraine sits down on the bed, and I never thought about this. As instinct, whenever I'm in one of these situations, I'll sit down on the bed, but I never thought about why. Lorraine said that this is a place where you spend 1/3 of your life, and it's the best place to tap into somebody's vibrations if that's what you're trying to do. So I just want to give you guys a heads up. After I'm gone, you may want to stay off of my bed. But anyway, Lorraine goes into this trance, and just a few minutes in, she starts describing a black man in uniform that didn't have any braids or any kind of military decorations on it. She said she sensed that he was filled with fear and guilt over a lack of acceptance, and then he felt really sorry about something. And then the man starts talking to her. He tells Lorraine that he had been accused of murder, and his cell was in the basement of the house that they were in. But he did say that the army had exonerated him of the murder, but he was still full of sorrow, and he was to the point where he just couldn't control it anymore, even though he wasn't guilty of murder and he had been found not guilty of murder. It was him that admitted to stealing these wallets and the jewelry and other things from the dignitaries and other top brass. He just said he wanted the army to pay attention and to feel his sorrow. So Lorraine started talking to him a little bit further, and she asked him his name. He answered her. He said his name was Greer, and then he spelled his name out to her, Greer. So she asked him the date, and he stammered for a little bit, and then he comes up with somewhere in the early 1800s. But then he admitted that he didn't really know the date anymore. And he turned around and asked her who she was. So Lorraine tells him that she'd been sent there by the army to tell him that he is not being held in dishonor, and that there was a reason why they had exonerated him, and that the records showed that the death he'd been accused of had not been a murder at all. She assured him that the army did understand his sorrow and that that was why she was there. She then tells him that he was holding himself back and that he had to exonerate himself, and that it had been enough time that had passed since this incident happened, and that now it's the early 20th century and he's in the 1970s. She explained that he didn't understand present day, and then she scolded him for stealing from the dignitaries and explained that he'd put the army in a really dangerous position by doing all that. So she then began to tell the folks that were gathered around her that Greer felt confused. He also no longer felt like he needed to take things from the visitors there, and that he wanted to come back to life. Lorraine then explained to Greer that he had to go into the light to live again, and that was something that we all have to do. She told him to focus on the light and step toward it, and then go to your family and friends. A few seconds later, she snaps out of her trance, looks around, and she tells everybody, I've lost him. He's just simply not here anymore. So Lorraine then assured the general that there would be no more pickpocket incidents at the mansion there. And I'd love to share the results of the historical end of the investigation, the one that would have publicly identified Greer, but all of that was sealed by the military, so only they know who he was, and we probably never will. All we know is Greer. Naked Wines, folks. Cards. All you guys got to do is message me. $100 gift cards. That's a very Merry Christmas, right? Jesse Holmes. Uncle Jesse's in the house. There's Carol Poche. Zachariah's in the house. Oh my goodness. Janine Seals here. Wayne Caves is here. And Brandy's here. Thanks for joining me. And before I get rolling again, Merry Christmas to you guys and all of your family. Hope you have a wonderful holiday. Okay, so the next case that they had pinpointed one of their favorites is in Stamford, Connecticut. Now, the real names are not even in Ed Warren's public files. So with that being said, Shelley, her husband Bruce, and their 3 kids move into this house that they just bought. Now, Shelley said, even before they went through the sale, this house, that she felt something wasn't quite right there. But they went ahead and bought it anyway. So they move in, of course, shit starts getting weird immediately. The 9-year-old Michael was seeming to catch the brunt of it, and it was freaking the kid out. Now, their 14-year-old and their 16-year-old were having their own share of experiences too, but they were just kind of shrugging it off and not paying it any mind. But whatever it was that was messing with Michael was loving the fact that this kid was scared shitless. So the oppression, of course, increased because it's feeling whatever this entity is. So Michael at first was complaining that he could feel somebody touching him and that he could hear somebody breathing in his room. And then things started to advance, and it went to him being poked and his hair pulled. And then the sheets were being ripped off of the bed from underneath him while he was trying to sleep. So when things start moving objects around you, that is a obvious sign of advancement, and things are fixing to move to another stage. It's time to start paying attention. When you see things and when you hear things, that's one case. When things start moving, closing, scratching, it's time to call the Warrens or somebody like them. So anyway, this madness was going on for a few weeks before Shelley's mom came to visit with them. Her first night there, Grandma said she saw 3 spirits standing outside the master bedroom door, which was downstairs. The very next night, daughter Jackie complained that she had been punched by someone from underneath the bed and through the box springs and mattress. Um, Things were starting to get really crazy in this house really fast. The night after that, Shelly was sitting on the bed while she's talking on the phone. All of a sudden, the foot of the bed rises up off the floor and starts shaking from side to side. So these folks were like, okay, enough with the dumb shit. We're calling the Warrens in, right? Of course, or else we wouldn't be talking about it, right? So Ed and Lorraine and their crew show up at this beautiful 18th century home. They walk in the door and they are immediately overwhelmed by this oppressive sensation. They all gathered in the den where they interviewed the family both together first and then separately. And after all of the interviews were pretty much under control, they decided to take a walk through the entire house. Now, again, Lorraine said the bottom levels seemed to be at peace. The basement, however, did have a slight presence, but it was fairly nominal at that point. So then the tour moves on to the second floor, where every single step up the stairs seemed to reveal the presence of other multiple entities that are attached to this house. Now, Jackie, which was the oldest one, her room was inspected first. And when they walked in, they said there was an overpowering pressure that was found there. Obviously, something evil was there, something inhuman. In the hallway between the rooms, there was the presence of something human lingering around there as well. Not necessarily the evil entity was in the hallway, but there were other things that were there, or other people, I should say, that were there. Then they went into Julie and Michael's rooms. Now, Michael is the one that's being oppressed. He's the youngest, the 9-year-old son. Julie's somewhere in the middle. I think she was 14. Now, they said they felt the same evil pressure that had been in Jackie's room in both of these kids' rooms. It just wasn't quite as strong. So why it was in Jackie's room at that point in time and so overpowering and not in Michael's, that's maybe he's trying to play mind games because they knew they were there for that boy. And before I carry on with that, I did want to make something clear to you. If you guys ever walk into a room and you feel like the air is being sucked out of it, or there's a big black balloon that's blowing up in it and it's shoving you into the back corner of that room, there is an evil entity in that room with you. Leave immediately. Pray first. Okay, so everybody wound up getting back together in the kitchen of the house, and a couple of the family members were still being interviewed by Ed and Lorraine's staff. So Lee, which is a clairvoyant that worked very frequently with Ed and Lorraine, was there, and she was sitting at the table. Well, all of a sudden, she started just trembling and swaying from side to side, and she asked for a piece of paper and a pencil, so she started automatic writing. One of these human spirits decided that they wanted to communicate right then. Now, I've read the transcript of this conversation, and it's pretty freaking mind-blowing. But the gist of the chat was this. The human spirits that were there were identified as Jeff Roberts and his wife, Mary, and another female named Emma. Ed did some investigating later, and he did find a census and some court records that proved that Jeff and Mary owned and lived in that house. But nobody knows who Emma was. I'm thinking she was probably one of their staff or something along those lines. Anyway, as Lee's communicating with these spirits, she's finding out that Jeff was pissed that the family was in the house, because in his mind, this was his house and they were trespassing. So that night, a few members of the Warren teams said they were going to go ahead and stay in the house just to document anything that may have happened. Well, just after midnight, this freezing cold presence starts lurking through the house. Then the banging noises started coming from inside the walls. This goes on for about an hour, and then it fades off and everything calms down. Now, the next night, the investigators were greeted by this ominous evil all through the house. But this time, they were armed with every piece of equipment that they could carry with them. They had cameras and recording devices, and you name it, they had it. And again, Just after midnight, the rapping on the walls started up again. So they decided they were going to try to communicate with whoever this spirit is that's beating on the walls. They said, okay, one rap means yes, two means no. Well, apparently the spirits were willing this night. The investigator actually wound up communicating with Jeff. Come to find out, it was Jeff that was holding the other human spirits there against their will, but he was being coerced by the inhuman spirit to do what it wanted. So this rapping goes on for about 4 hours that night, and he's answering odds and ends questions. And in the middle of all this, they figure out that Jeff really wasn't such a nice person to begin with, that he wasn't the one that was responsible for all of the mayhem that's going on in this house, especially the tormenting of this little 9-year-old boy. So the Warren team was trying to convince Jeff that they needed to walk into the light and leave this plane, but he wasn't having it. So the next night, Ed and Lorraine decide they're going to stay over and they're going to try to communicate with Jeff. But that's when things went apeshit. There was this night with the Warrens and their team. With them was the family. Shelley's cousin was also called in, and he was a police officer. From what I understand, he was a rather large police officer. But this dude was just terrified of the paranormal. So all the equipment set up all around the kitchen table, and Lee decided she was going to kick off the event with another automatic writing session. So the first spirit to communicate that night was someone that called himself Father. They never did figure out who he was or where he came from. But shortly after his brief conversation with Lee, Jeff showed up. And of course, I'm going to take a break for a minute. Oh my God, I'm fangirling. Greg Newkirk is in the house. Merry Christmas to you. I got Mitch Hyman in the house too with Joe Meir. Harry Short and Susie said she has heard about that one. That's awesome. Hey, James, good to have you joining me tonight. I hope you guys are enjoying the Warren case files. I love the Warrens. I wish I'd had a chance to meet Ed. But through Greg and Dana, I've actually got to see a few of the relics that the Warrens worked with. So still fangirling, Greg. Not over it yet, dear. Merry Christmas to you. All right, so Lee manages to talk with Jeff for a little while, but after there was some communication going on there, Jeff started getting a little hostile, and he wound up taking over Lee's body. He starts verbally attacking everybody in the room. He's cussing and screaming and pitching a fit, kind of like me with road rage. Anyway, Lorraine starts reciting St. Michael's prayer, but then the shit hit the fan. Jeff started becoming extremely violent and attacked Ed through Lee. Poor Lee's probably getting beat up pretty good and not knowing what's going on because it's Jeff that's doing all these things through her. It took everybody in the room, including this massive police officer, to pull this small framed woman off of Ed and hold her down. So eventually Lee manages to struggle and fight her way free of her affliction, and things started to settle down a little bit. It was getting late, so the Warrens asked Shelley's cousin to stay over, just in case something else came up. Big cornbread-fed police officer said, hell no. So a couple members of Ed Lorraine's team stayed over just in case anything went haywire. And of course, Ed reached out and contacted another friend of theirs, Father Bishop, and scheduled an exorcism for a couple days later. So everybody shows up for this ritual, and Shelley had purchased a whole bunch of religious items, which previously the house had had no religious memorabilia anywhere hanging in it, but now it was full. So she's placed all of her religious icons around the house, and she's taken the kids out, and they are staying with relatives. So the cameras and all the recording equipment had already been set up, and they were all sitting there ready, waiting for this rite to begin. Now, everybody was preparing for Lee to become possessed by Jeff again. They done fell sucker to this once. It wasn't going to happen twice. So nobody was caught off guard when it did happen again. Father Bishop arrived and began blessing the house. Now, after 15 minutes or so, he'd walk through each room and he'd prayed and he'd sprinkled each room with holy water. Then the exorcism rite began. Now, the entire ritual was spoken in Latin. Almost immediately, Lee fell under Jeff's control. In his own voice, Jeff informed the priest that his ritual was not going to work. He became violent again. Lee was tackled and then restrained into this heavy wooden chair to keep from hurting herself or anybody else. It took all 5 men present there that day to strap her into this chair, but she didn't stay that way long. She was pulling at the restraints so violently that she snapped the chair legs. So then it's down to just these 5 guys trying to hold her down. Ed's notes said that she was tossing them around like rag dolls. An hour and a half later, the rite was finished. The Warren team was torn, and some members felt that the house was at peace. Some of them not so much. So a couple days later, Shelley was calling them back and telling them that the madness had just kicked into a whole nother gear. So the Warren team decided they would do another sleepover at the house. But nothing happened there that night. So the team all leaves, and a little while later, here's Shelley on the phone again calling them, telling them now there's activity going on in this house during the day. That had never happened before. So this first attempt at an exorcism apparently didn't do anything but piss either Jeff or this negative entity off. So they schedule another sleepover, and this time it was a party. The wrapping started on the walls early, but there was a whole different feel about the entire place. Everybody on the Warren team was starting to feel drained. And around 1:30 that morning, Emma and Mary materialized to one of the other investigators. They'd had a sense that they kind of popped in to say their goodbyes. The investigator just suddenly knew that this exorcism had weakened this inhuman entity's grip on Jeff, which was just enough to allow him to release Emma and Mary. But the rapping kicked back up, and it continued for another hour after that. The investigators wound up leaving the house around 8:30 the next morning. And shortly after that, Shelley's on the phone again calling them. Shelley's mother, who was still at the house, had to be hospitalized from some unexplainable illness that immediately or just overcame her from out of nowhere. The house was full of activity again. The rapping had become louder, and now there was a new noise. It sounded like the fluttering of wings. Other than the cold flux of this inhuman entity roaming around the house, nothing else happened that night. But the next day, Julie was injured in a pretty serious car wreck. The car was totaled as well, and activity starts ramping up again. So Ed and Lorraine counseled with Father Bishop, and they decided that they would conduct a solemn exorcism with all of the members of the family present. Now, this rite took approximately an hour and a half, and it's reported that only minor activity was documented during this ritual. The house and the family, they've been at peace ever since. I'm thinking all of this madness was still going on because that 9-year-old boy was not present for that first ritual that they had. But that's just my thoughts. Scott McReynolds, David Stewart, and again, hi, Brandy. And Kenny. Hey, Kenny, how are you doing? Hey, Ray, good to see you guys tonight. So the next case I know you guys have heard of, just maybe not by this name. In Ed Warren's files, it's called the Smurl Family Haunting, which we've seen in a made-for-TV film titled The Haunted. The home of Jack and Janet Smurl in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, was the scene of a horrific and terrifying haunting from 1985 to 1987. This case received wide attention in the media. Although the house went through 3 separate exorcisms and investigations by demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, this demon absolutely refused to leave. So John and Mary Smurl bought this house in Pittston in 1973. It was actually a duplex that was built in 1896. Now, after Hurricane Agnes flooded the Smurls from out of their family home, they move into the left side of the duplex. Jack's parents were living in the right side. So the Smurls spent a whole lot of time and money redecorating and remodeling and doing a whole lot of the work themselves. We all know here on the Twisted Southern Horror Queen show, when you renovate or remodel a very old house, you're pissing someone off. So they found out the hard way, right? The Smurls were a really close, loving family. Both Jack and Janet grew up in the same exact area. They met there in 1967. They got married in 1968. Jack served in the Navy. He was actually a neuropsychiatric technician, whatever the hell that is. I'm sure it had a great paycheck associated with it, though. Both Smurls were raised in Catholic homes and they had strong religious beliefs. They enjoyed living with Jack's parents and they had no trouble sharing this duplex with them. The first 18 months on Chase Street were actually very happy ones. But shit started getting weird and things started happening after that. It was January 1974. This strange stain appears on the brand new carpet. Jack's television set burst into flames and water pipes start leaking even after they'd all been resoldered. Now the new sink in the bath and the bathtub in the remodeled bathroom were found severely scratched up like some wild animal had clawed at them. All the freshly painted woodwork in the bathroom also showed similar scratches. In 1975, their oldest daughter, Dawn, repeatedly saw people floating around in her bedroom, which was right down the hall from this little bathroom. Now, by 1977, the Smurls realized they weren't alone in their home. These toilets were flushing on their own. They were constantly hearing footsteps on the stairs. Drawers were opening and closing on their own. Radios would turn themselves on weird stations and just blare, even if they were unplugged. They saw rocking chairs rocking with nobody in them. And as time went on, they began to smell this sour and vile stench all throughout the house on several occasions, but they never were able to locate the source. And Jack actually started complaining that he'd been touched quite often by a set of unseen hands. Well, by now, there's two more Smurls in the household. There's twins Shannon and Karen, and the family was growing frustrated and fatigued by all this increasing phenomenon, not to mention two infants in the house. So in 1985, what had started as an annoying disturbance became a frightening experience. This house was becoming ice cold off and on. John and Mary heard loud, abusive, and obscene language coming from Jack and Janet's side of the house, even though Jack and Janet weren't even arguing at the time. In February of 1985, Janet heard her name being called while she was in the basement doing laundry. She looked all around and finally realized that she was in that basement all by herself. Hey, little Joe West, good to see you. Hey, Miss Sandy, Merry Christmas to you guys. So 2 days later, they're feeling this icy cold moving through the house again. But this time, this black human-shaped form with no facial features appears to Janet in the kitchen. It dematerialized through one wall, and then it appeared to Mary on the opposite side of the duplex. From that point on, all the haunting activity increased in both frequency and magnitude. A large ceiling fan actually crashed down just inches from Shannon. That's one of the new twins. Almost killed her. And on that same night, her now 13-year-old sister, Heather, she was supposed to be confirmed into the Catholic religion. They didn't make it that evening. So activities increasing, and Jack and Janet on occasion had wound up levitating from out of their bed. Janet was violently pulled out of her bed one evening after making love to her husband, and he was just laying there in the bed paralyzed and gagging from this foul odor that filled the room. There was nothing he could do but sit there and watch her fly across the room. The family's German shepherd, Simon, was repeatedly picked up and thrown. See, I would have drawn the line right there. If something's throwing one of my dogs around, oh no, you got to go. So terrible rapping noises, scratching noises were continuously being heard in the walls. One night while sleeping, Shannon was tossed out of bed and down the stairs. Even the neighbors weren't spared. Several people reportedly heard them screaming, and all kind of strange noises were coming from the house. And some of these times, none of the Smurls were even home to be making noise. Most of these neighbors were sympathetic as the Smurls vowed that they were going to fight whatever this was. So in January 1986, Janet hears about Ed and Lorraine Warren. She was skeptical, but having really nowhere else to turn, she called the Warrens. Now, the Warrens arrived shortly thereafter, accompanied by Rosemary Frey, who was a registered nurse and, of course, a psychic. They began their investigation by interviewing the Smurls to find out about their religious beliefs, the happiness of their family life, and whether or not they had practiced Satanism or the occult or used a Ouija board in any way, had they invited some kind of supernatural entity into their home. Well, they get through all their questioning and they figured out they've really done nothing other than renovate to cause all of this madness to start buzzing around them in the first place. So the Warrens and Frey walked through the house, and they identified one of the bedroom closets as a crossover point between the two sides of the duplex. This team said that they detected the presence of 4 evil spirits. 3 of them were minor, but that 4th one, it was a demon. Without any evidence of any kind of family dysfunction, occult invitation, or tragedy, the Warrens could only surmise that this demon must have been lying there dormant, probably for decades, and then arisen to draw on the emotional energy generated by these young children after they'd been disturbed after the renovation. So the Warrens tried twice to provoke this demon to expose itself by playing tapes of religious music and confronting it with prayer. But the demon reacted violently, and it was shaking this mirror and dresser drawers. And in another instance, it actually spilled out, "You filthy bastard, get out of this house." Only holy water and prayer seemed to stop this manifestation. So the situation began to turn more serious as Jack was raped by this scaly succubus that was posing as an old woman with a young body. He described her as having red eyes and green gums. Sounds like a crack hoe that walks down on 1064 here in Tickfall. Anyway, Ed Warren was choked and he began to suffer from terrible flu-like symptoms. This incubus sexually assaulted Janet with pig noises, and there was scratching and all kind of banging going on inside the walls. Now, I would like to relate this to you. There's been several different hauntings where the shape or the image of a pig has manifested, or the sounds of pigs have manifested. Let me explain where this came from. Demonic possession is confirmed in the Bible in many, many places. But in this one in particular, Jesus cast a demon out of a man that was there to worship him and cast it into a group of wild pigs that ran off the side of the cliff after that. So this is kind of a mockery of Jesus and God, however you want to look at it, having infinite power over evil. So that's one of the reasons why these entities will manifest in the form of a pig or make these pig noises. There's a whole lot of other things that go along with that, but hey, we cover that from time to time here on the show. So the Smurls said they tried to travel several times. They'd gone to churches. They talked to the Catholic Diocese of Scranton, and nobody was really interested in trying to help them out. At one point in time, Janet thought she was going to get help from this priest named Father O'Leary, but then she discovered that this priest didn't really exist. So in other words, you had a curious priest at the diocese that wanted to hear the story, but wouldn't give him his real name. So the Warrens brought in Father, which is now Bishop McKenna. We talked about him a little earlier. He's a traditionalist priest who refused to abide by the changes in ritual, which were mandated by the Second Vatican Council. He said Mass in Latin, and he performed more than 50 exorcisms from the Warrens. He conducted this ancient rite, which actually did nothing but infuriate this demon. So the haunting continued,
And daughter Karen started falling seriously ill from some strange fever, and she almost died. Dawn was almost raped by this evil presence. Janet and Mary had slash marks and bites on their arms. Everybody's depressed. Ed Warren started explaining that they were in the second demonic stage, which is known as oppression, which follows infestation, which is followed by possession and then death, typically. Bishop McKenna performed a second exorcism in the late spring, but again, the demon refused to leave. Um, the family went on this camping trip in the Poconos, and the demon went along with them and harassed the family and started following Jack to work at some point as well. So now this family knew that they couldn't just move into another house because the demon was only going to follow them. So after repeated refusals by the church to help, the Smurls decided to appear on television. Remaining anonymous and sitting behind a screen, they were interviewed by Richard Bay on a local Philadelphia show called People Are Talking. So this demon got pissed off. It retaliated. It levitated Janet and it then hurled her against a wall. And it later appeared to Jack as this monstrous creature resembling a pig on two legs. And then this human hand came through the mattress and grabbed Janet by the back of the neck, and Jack was raped again. On August of 1986, the Smurls felt the risk of the ridicule didn't outweigh the need to tell their story to a wider audience. So they were granted another interview on the Wilkes Barre Sunday show, or independent newspaper, excuse me. Almost immediately, this house becomes a tourist attraction. Lookers and skeptics and curious folks all wanted to come and check it out. And some of these skeptics, who included some of the Smurls' neighbors, said that they believed the family was concocting this whole story to profit from book and movie contracts. I need to break in for a minute because we're fixing to lose armed radio. Big bad Jimmy Bell said I've talked for too long, but I'm not finished with the Smurl case. So you have a Merry Christmas, Jimmy Bell. Hope everything goes well for you guys this holiday season. Okay, so the Smurls then reached out and they contacted this medium, Mary Alice Rinkman, who examined the house and corroborated with what the Warrens' findings were. She said, too, that she felt four spirits, identifying one as an old woman named Abigail, another as a dark mustached man named Patrick, who had murdered his wife and her lover and then had been hung by a mob. She couldn't identify the third, but the fourth was indeed a powerful demon. So press coverage finally pushed the Scranton Diocese into action, and they offered to take over this investigation. The Warrens had also planned a mass exorcism with several priests. So prayer groups came to the house to give comfort. Bishop McKenna came a third time to exorcise the house, and this time the ritual seemed to work. There were no disturbances for about 3 months. Shortly before Christmas in 1986, Jack again saw the black form beckoning him to the third stage of possession. He clutched his rosary and he prayed, hoping that this was just simply an isolated incident. It wasn't. The banging started again, as well as the putrid smells and the violent acts of aggression. Frustrated, tired, and hopeless, the Smurls moved to another town. And shortly before the release of a book concerning their ordeal, The Haunted went to press. The church performed a fourth and final exorcism in 1988, and finally the family's at peace. And that's a whole lot of years to live with all that kind of madness going on in your life. So you got to kind of give them kudos for sticking together and toughing it through. All right, so guys, I'm glad y'all joined me tonight. Like I said, I won't see you next week, so Merry Christmas to all of you guys. I hope Santa brings you exactly what you want. It would be bad if he did that for me. But thanks for tuning in. Enjoy your holidays, and you guys, I guess I'll see you back here again maybe a couple Mondays from now on the Twisted Southern Horror Queen Show. Y'all take it easy and keep it creepy, because you know I will.